I am recording this on a secondary device because the primary recorder has begun to fail in ways I cannot logically account for, introducing distortions that do not follow any electronic failure pattern I know. And given the circumstances, I need the station to have an unbroken record of what I witnessed out here, assuming I managed to leave this district at all. My assignment seemed straightforward on paper. Travel to the outer agricultural hamlet of Hillstone Verge and investigate the series of unexplained nighttime power fluctuations, dying livestock, and intermittent bursts of low-frequency noise that residents had been reporting for weeks. Local authorities logged everything under environmental anomalies and electrical grid instability, nothing unusual for a rural area with aging infrastructure, and I was sent only because the editor needed a filler piece for the Sunday segment. Even before I reached the settlement, the road felt unnaturally empty, like the entire region was paused between breaths. The radio in my car began picking up faint static pulses 30 minutes before I arrived. Regular, spaced, almost metronomic, but they vanished the moment I crossed the hamlet's boundary, replaced by complete silence across every station. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt wrong, heavy yet cold, dense like the silence inside a recording studio just before someone speaks. The locals greeted me with a mix of reluctance and thinly veiled fear, not the kind directed at strangers, but the kind shared by people who have collectively agreed not to mention something. They insisted nothing was wrong anymore, that the outages had stopped, the noises faded, the animals stabilized, but their eyes kept shifting toward the fields, like they were expecting something to rise out of the soil at any moment. I asked about the reports of ground vibrations, entries filed anonymously in the district system, but each resident claimed ignorance, pretending not to know what I meant. One elderly man muttered that it listens when you talk about it, but refused to clarify. I was ready to assume superstition until I found the utility shed at the far end of the fields, a structure not listed on any local maintenance map. Inside, dozens of handwritten logs were taped to the walls. Dates, times, and descriptions of rhythmic knocking under the floorboards, always occurring between midnight and 3 a.m., always the same pattern of 3 beats followed by silence. As I examined the logs, I felt a faint vibration beneath my feet, not strong, but distinct enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. Tools hanging on the walls trembled slightly, edges quivering like something was giving off a low-frequency signal through the ground. The moment I stepped outside to document the phenomenon, the sun dropped below the cloud line, casting the entire hamlet into a premature dusk. The silence deepened, becoming so complete it was almost painful. No birds, no wind, no buzzing insects. Only the faint metallic scent of ozone drifting on still air. When I attempted to start my car to reposition closer to the shed, the engine sputtered, then died entirely. The radio flipped through empty channels before locking onto a repeating static pulse, the same rhythm the logs described. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause. And then I saw them. 3 pale beams of light sweeping slowly across the far section of the fields, moving not like flashlights or machinery, but drifting, hovering, scanning the ground. I aimed my camera, but the autofocus failed, the lens hunting back and forth as if the distance to the lights was shifting in ways that defied geometry. Before I could approach, all 3 beams blinked out at the same instant, leaving behind only darkness and the persistent pulse on the radio. The ground beneath the shed vibrated once more, a slow, deliberate thump, as though something below recognized that I had noticed. I don't believe the locals are hiding the truth out of malice. I think they're terrified that speaking about it will draw its attention. And I cannot shake the feeling that whatever is beneath this settlement is becoming increasingly aware of anyone who listens too closely. At midnight, according to the logs, the knocking becomes coordinated. I will attempt a direct recording with a contact mic. If the ground pulses again, I'll know for certain that this is not a mere infrastructure failure, but something deliberate, something communicating, or worse, something rehearsing. I approached the shed again at 23:58, the fog rolling in so quickly it felt as though the hamlet were sinking into a vat of cold smoke, the air thick enough to swallow the edges of buildings and blur the fence line into a wavering smear of gray. I kept the recorder running from the moment I stepped outside, yet the device immediately began producing faint digital artifacts, soft crackles, warped harmonics, clipped blips that only appeared when I faced the direction of the fields, and the closer I moved toward the shed, the stronger they became, growing into an almost melodic distortion that had no business coming from malfunctioning equipment. By the time I reached the door, the ground felt subtly unstable, like a thin sheet stretched over something hollow. Exactly at midnight, the knocking returned. This time it didn't come from below. It began inside the walls, traveling in a slow, deliberate circle, as if something within the structure were feeling along the perimeter, searching for the weakest point. The pattern remained the same: 3 beats, then silence, but the pacing was wrong, too intentional, almost responsive to my movements. When I stepped left, the knocking shifted left. When I stepped back, it paused, then resumed at a different point in the wall. Pressing my ear to the plywood, I heard more than knocks. Beneath them was a low, rolling exhalation, like a massive pressure release valve buried far underground. For a moment, the tone deepened into something that felt almost vocal, not speech but resonance, the sound of an immense body adjusting inside a confined space. Suddenly, the soil outside pulsed upward under my feet, a gentle yet unmistakable swell of earth. And then the lights appeared again. 3 pale beams materializing above the crops, drifting with slow precision. They formed a triangle, maintaining exact distance between each point, rotating as a single unit like a surveying instrument. I lifted my camera, but the autofocus jittered, the frame warping as though the space around the lights were bending. When I zoomed in, the triangle distorted into elongated smears, stretching too far to belong to any physical object, as if the device couldn't determine perspective. Then, near the far fence, a figure emerged, tall, motionless, the silhouette of a person but with no visible features, no movement, no breath. It stood angled toward the lights, not toward me, its posture unervingly still. I called out, but it didn't react, didn't twitch, didn't acknowledge sound. Instead, it tilted its head when the triangle pulsed, as though listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. The ground beneath me vibrated again, stronger this time, almost like a heartbeat rising through soil. The lights brightened, then contracted inward as though folding into a point, and with a single soundless flash they vanished. The figure's head snapped toward me, but instead of taking a step, it seemed to glide, drifting forward without motion in the limbs, carried by some unseen force. I stumbled back, the recorder slipping in my grip as the distortion spiked into a deafening buzz, drowning out even my own breath. I turned to run, the fog thickening into a cold wall that narrowed the world to a few meters. When I reached the road and looked back, the shed lights flickered wildly, and inside the walls the knocking resumed, slower now, heavier, like something exhausted but persistent. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. Not random. Not mechanical. Intentional. A pattern repeated patiently, as if waiting for a response. When I returned to my car, the battery indicator showed full power, yet the engine refused to engage, the starter clicking in the same 3-beat rhythm the shed produced. I shut it off, and everything fell silent, too silent. The wind hadn't returned. The insects remained gone. The air was motionless. Only the memory of that rhythm echoed in my head, aligning with my pulse. I can't shake the feeling that the knocks aren't messages, they're measurements. Something is listening, calculating, adjusting itself to the presence of anyone who approaches. And now it knows I'm here. By the time dawn broke, the knocking had ceased entirely, yet the silence left behind was even heavier than the night itself, as though the absence of that rhythm created a vacuum the environment didn't know how to fill. I made my way back to the shed, stepping carefully along the cracked soil, which now displayed clear signs of displacement. Thin fractures radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel, too symmetrical to be natural. I traced the largest of these cracks toward the drainage ditch near the west field, where something metallic glinted beneath the mud. Clearing the dirt with my hands, I uncovered a buried access plate about a meter square, industrial in texture, pitted with age but unmistakably manufactured. Yet none of the district maintenance logs show any subterranean infrastructure under Hillstone Verge. As I brushed away more mud, the recorder, powered off and clipped to my belt, produced a soft trill of static, the same cadence as the knocks. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. The air around me thickened, not in temperature but density, a subtle compression like the atmosphere in a sealed chamber. I placed my palm against the plate. It was warm, uncomfortably so, as if heat were being generated below. A faint hum vibrated through the metal and up into my arm. A smooth mechanical oscillation that matched the cadence I'd been hearing for hours. Something beneath this ground was active, alive in the way machinery can be alive, pulsing with purpose. I felt a sudden shift beneath my feet as the soil trembled lightly, and then a narrow seam opened at one corner of the plate, silent, precise. A thin stream of vapor escaped, cold enough to sting my face, yet carrying a smell like burnt insulation mixed with something briny, like seawater evaporated under a heat lamp. The hum rose slightly in pitch, and the recorder, still off, began emitting faint whispers, loops of fragmented syllables too distorted to decipher. As I knelt to inspect the opening, the fog parted above the ditch, and the triangle of lights reappeared, not drifting across the fields, but positioned directly above the access plate, rotating faster than the night before. Each light seemed to focus downward, forming 3 narrow beams that converged on the metal surface. Shadows bent unnaturally around the beams, stretching long and thin like liquid pulled toward a drain. Then the plate convulsed, a single violent jolt, as if struck from below by something massive. The seam widened another few centimeters. The soil around the ditch collapsed inward, forcing me to grab at the tall grass to stop myself from sliding into the forming cavity. Inside the widening gap, I glimpsed movement, dark, angular shapes shifting in synchronized motions, too smooth to be organic but too fluid to be mechanical. They aligned and realigned like components adjusting inside a machine. One angled upward, sensing my presence. Instantly, the hum escalated into a shrill resonance, and the lights above compressed inward, collapsing the triangle into a single vertical beam that struck the plate with blinding intensity. The cavity's bottom buckled, and for an instant I saw deeper, a chamber, vast, metallic, structured like a lattice. And something within that lattice moved with intention. Then everything stopped. The lights vanished. The hum cut off mid-frequency. The ground solidified beneath me with an abruptness that felt unnatural, as though the force pulling the soil inward had been switched off rather than fading out. The opening sealed itself slowly, the metal plate rising back into place like a lid settling on a pressure tank. The whispers in my recorder continued, even after I removed the battery and physically disconnected every power source. They looped over and over, not words, but patterns like sonar, trying to map a surface. When I returned to the hamlet, residents watched from behind curtains, their expressions confirming what I already suspected. This wasn't an isolated incident. They had known for years. They had learned to stay silent, not because they understood what was beneath them, but because the thing under the ground reacts to attention. It listens. It responds. And now that I have interacted with it directly, I am certain it has begun adjusting itself in response to me. I'm recording this final segment, even though I'm no longer certain who, if anyone, will receive it, because the moment I tried to escalate my findings to the district communications office, the call collapsed into the same 3-beat static pulse that has followed me since the first night, repeating through the handset even after I pulled the cable from the wall. The interference didn't sound like a malfunction. It sounded like recognition. I attempted to leave the hamlet by the main road just after sunrise, but a maintenance barricade I hadn't seen before blocked the way, its reflective signs spotless and new despite there being no record of recent construction. I tried the east road, then the south, and found identical barricades on each one, arranged not randomly, but with the same precise spacing as the lights that hovered above the fields. On my third attempt, dense fog spilled across the asphalt like a living tide, swallowing the landscape in seconds until I could barely see the hood of my car. The engine coughed, then stalled, dashboard lights blinking rhythmically. 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, pause. Before I could restart it, 3 pale beams appeared in the fog ahead, drifting toward me with deliberate slowness, maintaining perfect triangular formation. The light didn't illuminate the fog, so much as cut through it, leaving thin, sharp-edged corridors of visibility that flickered at the periphery of my vision like overstretched film frames. I stepped out of the car, leaving the engine dead, the recorder pinned to my jacket, capturing the low churn of static that had begun blending with my own pulse. As I backed away, the lights stopped their advance and hovered. The ground beneath my boots pulsed with a slow, rising pressure, not shaking but swelling, as if something huge beneath the soil were expanding and contracting in measured intervals, not breathing but simulating breath. Then, from behind me, far across the fields near the ditch, I heard a metallic groan, long and grating, the unmistakable shriek of metal under immense strain. It carried through the fog in deep, resonant waves. I turned toward the sound as 5 silhouettes emerged from the gray sheet covering the fields. They stood in a straight line, evenly spaced, facing the road with unnatural stillness. Their proportions were wrong, subtle at first, longer limbs, necks a shade too high, shoulders that sat slightly off angle, as though someone had imitated a human shape using unfamiliar blueprints. None of them moved. None shifted stance or breathed or blinked. They simply watched, unmoving, like sensors waiting for calibration. As they held their positions, the hum returned, louder than at any point before, rising through the soles of my shoes into my bones, no longer a sound but a physical force, a pressure vibrating the air itself. My recorder shook against my chest, the audio feed registering peaks that blurred into unreadable bands. When the hum reached a steady rhythm, each silhouette tilted its head at the same moment. The triangular lights brightened, as though receiving an identical signal. The fog around them pulsed outward in rings, shifting densities like ripples in liquid air. Then, abruptly, the lights blinked in unison. Every figure snapped its head toward me instantly and simultaneously, their silhouettes jerking into alignment with unsettling mechanical precision. But instead of advancing, they froze again, outlines flickering slightly, as if their positions were being recalculated frame by frame. The hum climbed to a piercing frequency, and for a moment I felt the sensation of being scanned, an invasive, full-body pressure like every contour of my shape was being mapped and stored. The triangular lights compressed inward until they formed a single thin beam, which shot up vertically and disappeared into the fog. Immediately, the silhouettes flickered, then collapsed into the mist, vanishing without footsteps, without displacement of air, without any trace. The hum cut out. The fog collapsed inward, thinning into translucent wisps in under a minute. When it cleared, the road was empty. My car sat silent. The field was still. Only the ditch remained visible in the distance, and the metal plate within it, now coated in a layer of frost despite the warm air, lay perfectly centered, perfectly flush with the earth, perfectly still, as though nothing had disturbed it. The recorder continued to play low-level static that slowly resolved, over the course of several minutes, into the familiar 3-beat pulse, repeating steadily like a waiting metronome. I tried leaving again on foot, but found the same barricades on every path, placed too precisely to be coincidence. I don't know if they're meant to keep the residents safe or to keep whatever lies beneath the soil from spreading. What I do know is that this file, if recovered without me, should be treated as evidence that the phenomenon beneath Hillstone Verge is neither dormant nor accidental. It observes, it measures, it adapts, and now that I've documented it, I suspect it has added me to whatever system it has been calibrating all these years. If this recording ends abruptly, assume the pattern reached its conclusion. If it does not understand that something beneath this ground is waiting for the next signal, and I fear that signal might already be on its way.